Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Mary Jo Putney, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of Authors Love Readers podcast. I am so excited to have Mary Jo Putney with us this week. Mary Jo and I have known each other for mumble years. Many years. We met through the Washington Romance Writers Conference, and she was a big deal and established when I was trying to get my first book sold, and was always so generous and kind to me. And then we used to meet every year at the retreat and find a few minutes in crazy packed time to find a few minutes to sit and talk now and then. Mary Jo is the author primarily of historical romances, but she's also ventured into some other areas that I'll let you talk about, Mary Jo.
Well, I love history. I love stories, but the muse gets a little restless now and then. Like when I read an article about controlled demolition in the Baltimore Sun, I got an idea for a story, and it's about 5 years before I got a publisher who would let me write it for them, a contemporary about explosive emotions and exploding buildings, or more accurately, imploding buildings. So there was that. I've always been a big fantasy reader, so I've written 4 books that are fantasies. And I did a young adult fantasy time travel trilogy where teenage mages from the Regency world go to World War II to help their country.
Wow. Now, how did
It's not an easy one to explain, so which is probably explains why it didn't sell very well.
Oh, but I bet people love it. Who found it?
People who found it loved
Yeah.
it. Yes.
Yeah. I can see where readers would just dive into that and want to stay in that world. That's fabulous. We'll come back to that a little bit, but let's do some questions to let readers get to know you. What is your favorite taste?
That was a really strange question. I mean, I really
know.
like peanut butter, chunky organic, but favorite taste, that's as far as I'm willing to go.
Oh, that's pretty specific. Okay. Are there any surprising jobs you've held?
Oh, I was a left-wing editor of a magazine, or more accurately, left-wing magazine's editor in England for a couple of years. I was a designer, a professional designer, industrial designer, product designer for years before I got a computer and found out that I could tell stories and sell them. There's probably some oddball things. I was working in the library in college, you name it.
So you never looked back from when you started writing stories. Do you ever regret not continuing to do design?
Absolutely not. Everybody was getting into computers then, and this way I didn't have to learn how to use a Mac and be a computer artist. But more than that, I'd always had stories in my head from the time I was a kid, daydreaming in classes where I was bored because I was always ahead of the material. And once I found out I could tell stories as like a lemming leaping over a cliff, I'd found what I was supposed to do when I grew up.
Do you have any stories from, especially before you actually started writing, where you didn't like the way it ended and you at least mentally rewrote it?
I will tell you a story about that. My sister, older sister, has a PhD in psychology. She is a good big sister means she's a little bossy. When I started writing my first book, I put RR on the floppy disk, because this was a long time ago. It's for Regency romance, because I couldn't quite admit to anybody I was trying to write a book. But I got started. 3 months after I started, I was offered a 3-book traditional Regency contract. I called my sister and said, "Gee, I've sold a book. I've sold a book." And she started grilling me, as older sisters do, and including, "Do you rewrite the endings of stories you don't like?" And I said, "Well, doesn't everybody?" And my
Ah.
sister, the PhD, said, "If you had told me that, I could have told you were a writer years ago."
But do you remember any specific stories that you rewrote the ending for?
Not really. Sorry. I looked through your list of questions, and there's a lot of things that I just don't have answers for.
Well, that's okay. That's all right. We will skip around here. How about fears? Do you have any fears? And then do you use them in books?
I think that the scars we acquire when we're growing up, both in our families and out in the world, power our stories. I talked once to another writer who was also a member of WRW, and she said, "You never run out of material. You go back to the same things over and over and
Mm.
over." My stories work out as stories of second chances, people becoming stronger in the mended places, and reconciliation. Those are my issues.
I love that, the idea that they're stronger in the mended places. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Well, my characters get pretty badly broken, so they'd better be
You
stronger at the
you
end.
are mean. You are so mean. You really make those put those characters through their paces. So,
Do you want to know why?
yes.
Particularly with the heroes, I write the traditional regencies, which are lords and ladies in the early 19th century. And the fact is that a man who is born with a title and a fortune is apt to be an entitled jerk. All we have to do is look around the world as we see it. And if you put him through some changes, make him hurt, make him empathic, make him learn how other people feel, he'll be a lot better guy by the end.
So you put him through a lot to make
Yes.
him a really good guy by the end.
I mean, who would want them at the beginning if they are just entitled jerks? But we have enough
No,
of those in real life. This is fantasy. We want good guys.
absolutely. Now, as you've gone along in life, have you dropped off things that you used to fret about that used to really bother you, and now you can look at them and go, "Huh, who cares? I'm
Well,
moving
part of
on."
that's just getting old. Having less energy on things because one way or another things work out. The bad stuff contributes to our total character, so no point in worrying too much. But on the whole, I've always had a fairly laid back disposition, except possibly where art directors are concerned.
So you've never regretted not having to deal with art directors, huh?
Actually, I did deal with them in some places because I had a design background. There were art directors that we could talk, direct designer to designer, and it worked very well. The only ones I don't like is the ones who sent me ugly covers. That hasn't happened in a long time.
Well, and a reader asks that question. How do you feel about it if the cover does not show especially the characters as you describe them?
Well, over time, most art editors and art directors will usually ask you, what does the character look like? Is there a scene that you would like to use? And you give them at least the basic coloring. I've been very lucky with my present publisher, Kensington, because they really pay attention. And there
Mm.
was one time when my editor and I had discussed and come up with what was a perfectly valid approach that could have worked, but what came out of it was a disaster. I mean, it wasn't that it was badly painted, it was just, it did not work at all. I screamed. My agent screamed. My editor tried to convince me, well, really, it was rather nice because that's her job. And then she took it to the head of the company and he said, give her a new cover.
Oh, good.
And the new cover
Oh,
was
good.
fabulous. I might add that my editor, possibly a tad exasperated by this point, said, well, what should it look like? I'm a designer. Remember, I said she's heading up the stairs in a scarlet gown, looking mischievously over her shoulder. And that's
Oh,
exactly what they did. The book is called Not Always a Saint, and the cover is fabulous.
oh, that's a happy ending to a cover story, no less.
Well, overall, I've done pretty well. I mean, I've had, most of the publishers I've worked with are conscientious. They want to sell books too. And if it doesn't always look like my own characters, I'm really realistic. That's one point where being a designer is helpful because you know that there are limits to what you can do.
Well,
It's a whole
another
different matter on my indie books. And you know all about indie publishing, of course.
and with indie, are you also using people on your covers?
I really think that romance works best if it shows people because it's all about people. And
Mm.
I'm lucky. Was one of the first people to start publishing my backlist independently in ebooks. In the beginning, there were very few cover images available. You really had to work to get something that would be workable. I work with a fabulous artist, Kim Killian, who's sort of the goddess of the romance cover business. And between us, because my design background and her incredible talent, we were usually able to come up with something that would work. But in the, let's see, 2011, 2008, in the 7 years since I started, there has become a much improved pool of images available. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to do a blog about the 4 different covers for my one medieval, starting with the publisher's cover, working through one that I ended up never using, going to another one that was sort of working but flawed, and the one I'm about to release, which is fabulous. And it's all because there's more stock available.
I've been wanting to blog about that too, especially because my very initial independent covers I did myself, some of which I thought were okay, most of which I thought yuck. So I think I don't know if readers are going to be interested or not, but I'm going to do that too and let them know.
I think a lot of readers are interested in that sort of thing. I was lucky because with my professional design background, I was determined that all my books must look professional. And while I didn't want to do the work myself because I'm lazy, a topic we will come back to, I was lucky to stumble across Kim Killian just as she was looking around to do cover work. And it was one of those moments made in heaven because I was able to work with her, and I think mine were the first book covers that she ever had that were out there and published. And together we learned, and it worked out really well because I, by God, wanted them to look professional. And I might add that not only is she a really good artist, but she is a master of using fonts. Fonts have a lot to do with how
Oh yeah.
professional it looks. A lot of those early, self-published books had these really klutzy, stupid choices in fonts that did not work well. You look at it and you see amateur.
I have my current cover artist. I've had some wonderful ones, and I've worked now Carrie, who's art by Carrie. And one of the things I love about her is she understands the very technical term. Can you move it a smidge to the right? And
What you want to do is work with people who listen.
Understands smidge.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm much harder on Kim. I will do things like say, this guy has black hair. Can you turn him into a blonde for this book? Because I really like it apart from that. And she says, that's going to be really hard. And then she gives it to me.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Because especially dark to light, that's really tough. A related reader question asks about how the authors feel when they discover after the book has been released, like editing errors or typos. How do you react to that?
I don't like them, but I'm philosophical. No matter how often you go over something, there's always going to be errors. It's almost like a law of nature. I remember back in my corporate designer days when I was given the annual reports to proof after the president and this chief officer, all these people had already gone over it. I always found more errors. I was a good proofreader. But the fact is, this happens. You do your best. There's no point in flagellating yourself. But if you, at some point, get the rights to the book and can publish it yourself, you can correct that stuff.
Have you always been philosophical? Because you are philosophical.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, taking everything personally is a recipe for a miserable life. Everybody else out there has their own lives, their own issues, their own agendas. Assuming that they are out to get me or something like that is never a very good position.
Well, the benefit from my standpoint is then I kill those people off in books. So it gives me a lot of victims in my books.
Well, I don't do murder mysteries, so I have fewer people to kill off, but there are some essences of people I have dealt with that I recognize in my own writing.
Uh-huh. Now, did you have a book in your childhood that really turned you on to story that you can point to?
Oh, there are so many books. As soon as I learned how to read, I was inseparable from a book. Tom Corbett's Space Cadet series until the 8th book when they got rid of Roger the Navigator and put somebody else in. Swiss Family Robinson.
You hold a grudge.
I was a romance person. I really liked him. I mean, he had his issues, but he was my favorite character. When they sent him off to the Academy in Mars, no way, no.
No, that was it. Huh? Okay.
But just anything. I liked those kid stories where the girl was the central character and was strong and smart. Trixie Belden, that kind of thing.
You started to talk about Swiss Family Robinson. It was.
Yes.
I know the first book. Was it a series?
No, I just reread it a lot.
Okay. Because I have said on the podcast before that The Wizard of Oz is part of a series. And there are not too many of us who know the whole series, but my older sister read them to me because I had back-to-back mumps and measles, or measles and mumps. I don't remember. I was like back to school one day. And so, and she read all those, and it was really cool. So if people are out there looking for books to read to their kids or grandkids, consider that. The whole Wizard of Oz series.
I knew it was a series, but I never actually read one of them that I can remember, although I certainly know the story, of course.
Yeah, pretty cool. It's pretty cool. So I have this bizarre desert island that has the facilities to play movies, but only 3 movies ever. And I am going to let you choose which 3 movies you're going to come to the island with and watch forevermore. What would they be?
This is a non-starter as a question. I looked at that and said, "Is she crazy?" Uh, I will start with the fact that the Lord of the Rings trilogy had better count as movie number one. I don't know.
Cheating.
One week it might be Shakespeare in Love. The next one, I'm not really sure. Sorry,
Oh,
I can't give you
no.
that
Okay.
answer. No, I hate making
All right.
choices.
Oh, really?
Yes, I'm very
How does
indecisive.
that affect your writing though? Because it's all about making choices.
Well, I know when it's right and I know when it's wrong, but when somebody gives me a couple of options that are all good, then I have a problem.
Ah, okay.
With a story, though, if it feels right, if it doesn't feel right, I just tread water until it feels right. I'm a kind of an instinctive writer that way. I'm not rational. I don't do antagonists. I don't take stories apart and analyze them and put them back together. I just write, and if it feels right, I keep going.
What does it look like when you're treading water? Are you still working on the manuscript, or are you staring at windows, or what are you doing?
All of the above. Part of it is that I will certainly be editing what I've already written because I basically do one draft. I do editing as I go along. At the end, I'm always late, so I just send it in and pray. So I will work on it until the previous parts as good as they can be. I might do some more research because with historical novels in particular, if something isn't working, go into the history and you'll find incredible things that will make your story come alive. And staring out the window, at the moment I'm staring out and I'm seeing a whole lot of snow. It's quite pretty as long as I don't have to drive in it.
Had you done a lot of research and known a lot about the Regency era before you started writing?
Well, I always liked history. When I was in college, I sat in on a non-official basis the English history course for 2 semesters. It met Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 8 a.m., and I did it
Oh,
voluntarily. The guy who taught the course was a great storyteller. He was really super. And I was up there 8 o'clock on Saturdays listening to his stories. So I always read history. And I had read a lot about Georgette Heyer. I can quote large chunks of Georgette
ah,
Heyer, the goddess of Regency romances.
yes.
And I certainly picked up a lot there, but you can't entirely trust what she's saying. And over time, it used to be whenever I started a book, I would go down to the Baltimore City Library, the extremely good public library with a great big tote bag, and I would go through books and I'd check some out, and then I would go through the bibliographies at the end, and I would get more, sometimes
Mhm.
interlibrary loan. I would fill up the tote bag at the library, and when I couldn't lift it, I would put 2 books back and leave.
Bet the hardest part of that was putting the 2 books back.
As long as I knew what I was, I could get them again.
Kept track,
Uh-huh.
yes. So now that because you've been doing this for a while, you know the kind of background atmosphere of the era that you're writing about.
I insert that I started my first book, I believe it was 32 years ago tomorrow.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
my
Oh, well,
anniversary.
congratulations.
I
Wow.
hadn't really thought about that till you said it, yes.
What does research look like for you now? Do you research to get the idea for the story?
The research supports the idea, and sometimes it often enables it to be filled out in better ways, but usually the story will begin with either some characters that I want to explore or some specific psychological interaction or some bit of history. I have a much broader foundation of historical knowledge than when I started originally. But I also think every book ought to have some fresh things that I find interesting to research, because if it's new and interesting to me, it'll probably be new and interesting to a lot of my readers.
I find sometimes that if I'm stuck, you're talking about things aren't going right, and you can feel it, and that you tread water. I find a lot of times that's when I go out and do additional research, and there's usually something that sparks
Exactly.
things again, gets
Exactly.
it going.
It's
I
part of the
love that.
creative process. It's feeding material into the mental hopper.
Yes, exactly. Let's keep having letting people know you. You're right-handed, right?
Yes.
Okay. On your right hand, is your index finger or your ring finger longer?
I saw that was among your questions, and I consider it somewhat odd. They're
It
close to
is.
this. They're close to the same length, but the index finger is a smidge longer,
And then the follow-up question is, how about on your left hand?
slightly more than a smidge. The index finger is longer. That's
Okay.
interesting.
I'm gonna have to try to figure out what this means. I just keep asking people. which is
It may
longer.
mean nothing. It's a genetic hiccup.
It could be, but somewhere in palm reading, I have read that your non-dominant hand is what you start with, and your dominant hand is what you make of yourself. Now, then, whether it's significant which finger is longer or not, I have no idea. But
Well, I've studied palmistry also, and there's a whole lot of different symbols and so forth that are on the hand and can be marked in different ways. Somebody did a palmistry article in a early edition of the Romance Writers Report for the RWA years and years ago, talking about the things that you would likely see with success. And at least a couple letters came into the magazine saying, "How dare you tell us we'll never succeed because of what we don't have in our hands?"
oh no!
I will add that I had most of those signs.
So you liked the article, right?
Well, I had studied palmistry, as I said, so I could look at it and see, okay, yeah, maybe there's something to this. It seems to be. I mean, I've always found it kind of interesting, and there's value to it, but I'm certainly no expert.
Well, I think we just hit the extent of my studying of palmistry with remembering that non-dominant hand was what you started with. Do you have any sayings that you hear coming out of your mouth now that you used to hear your mom or dad say?
But the only piece of maternal advice I got from my mother is don't marry a man thinking you can change him.
Ooh, that's a good one. Have you ever had good advice that you have not followed, and how did it turn out?
I mean, advice is all along. Just because something doesn't work out the way you expect doesn't mean it was a mistake.
Hmm.
That's too cut and dried a question for a cut and dried answer.
I didn't say a mistake. I just asked how that you got good advice, you ignored it, and how did it turn out?
If it's behind me, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. There's plenty of things to worry about in the present and the future.
Isn't that interesting though that you have that approach and yet you love history?
Well, history is the people's stories. That's what makes it fascinating. So I'm all about the stories.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any songs that you love that not just love, but that you feel like they speak about who you are?
Not really. I mean, there are songs I like, there are songs I don't like, but trying to pin them down to an era or a particular feeling. Actually, my mayhem consultant and I have not a song, but a piece of music. And it's the Pachelbel Canon,
Mm.
which we both discovered at the same time, the RCA Victor recording. And something about that spoke to us. And when we finally got around to getting married after 33 years of hanging out, we had them play that for our song to dance to. They played it slowly, so we kind of could.
Oh, that's lovely. That's absolutely lovely. Okay, another one. A lot of writers, and if you say you don't have one, this may be the end of a long friendship, Mary Jo. But a lot of writers have a bad habit word or more that crops up in their manuscripts, and they have to go back and take them out. Word or phrase or
Well,
construction.
remember, you're a highly trained journalist from one of the best journalism school in America. You are a professional editor. I have words like that, but I'm less inclined to worry about them. If I notice them when I'm going through on the copy edit, I'll take them out. But again, it's usually not a disaster. Readers are reading for the story, as long as it isn't a totally stupid word. And some of the ones, like just, really, actually, all of those kinds of words, they do crop up
Yep,
repeatedly.
you got two of mine, just and really. Those, and this is I don't know if the listeners are picking up on it, but this is probably another reason it was really good for me to talk to you every year.
And you have had a
Yes.
long and successful career as a romance writer, as well as publishing guides to correct use of grammar and writing and so forth. So clearly, you are using your tools to make the world a better place for yourself and writers. And mine is all about the stories, and that's what I do.
Yeah, my book is Word Watch, and it's about word usage primarily. And that stemmed from an article I used to write for the Washington Romance Writers newsletter.
Yeah, it was really good.
So, thanks. I had a good time writing that. Okay, so I want to get to, well, I did hit you with a couple of reader questions, but another one asks where you write and if you have an inspirational view.
I prefer writing at my desktop to my laptop. My laptop and I have never been friends except for checking email when I'm traveling or listening to DVDs. I have a very nice upper level office that looks out on the woods across the driveway at my neighbor's woods. And they're always very lovely. It's a northern view, and it doesn't get too much heavy sunshine. So all year round, you can watch the leaves, you can watch the snow, you can watch the budding trees. There's a red bud on his lawn just there. And it's really, really nice. But, I haven't always had this, and I wrote a lot of stories before I got this house. I got this house basically because I'd run out of places for bookcases in the old one. Unfortunately, it's happening again, and I don't want to move.
Oh no! Oh no! That is definitely an occupational hazard, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, how can you get rid of a book? It's like lopping off a finger. You might, and particularly with historical research, you might need it, and you'll never know when all of a sudden that one book that you picked up at a library sale 15 years ago is exactly what you need. You can pull it off and read it.
I used to have, I still have the bookcases, but I used to be able to get bookcases that were for VHS tapes and I guess DVDs too, that are just the right depth for paperback books,
Right.
and then they fit behind doors.
Uh-huh.
I love those, but I don't think they're making them as much these days because so many people are streaming. We need to bring those bookcases back. Those are great uses of space.
I have covered just about every inch of my house that is book spaceable, including a row of rather narrow bookcases opposite my washer and dryer and the kitty litter boxes.
Maybe not your favorites in that bookcase.
No, actually, it's a lot of my favorite reading, but they do tend to get dusty from the clay in the kitty litter.
Yes, I bet. I bet. So, when you have a story idea, then what's your process from idea to making it into a book?
Sometimes it can be years. I'll have a wisp of an idea. One of my favorite examples was I had this image in my mind of a silver-haired, sprite young girl who lives in her garden and doesn't talk. She's not mute, but she doesn't talk, but just whisks around her garden, and prunes things and plants things. And because she's an heiress and considered mad, people kind of leave her alone. But I also had another thing. I have a thing about twins. I've written about twins several times because they're kind of fascinating. And when I was researching my first twin book, I found that female twins are often best friends. Male twins often go through a period of estrangement in adolescence. Sometimes it's permanent as well. Often it's temporary. But it's like, well, they're defining themselves and it pushes them apart. So one day, the silver-haired girl met the estranged twins and boing! That was the inspiration for my next two books, The Wild Child when they're estranged, and then The China Bride after they've made things up, and the brother who was the older heir and angry has gone off and followed his bliss and his horizons and is finding the perfect woman.
Huh. Well, that's cool. But again, you start with this idea. How do you make it into a book?
I just keep chewing on it like a bone. One thing, there's a lot of things you can learn about writing. You can learn to be a better stylist. You can learn to use grammar correctly. You can learn how to structure a story. But on some level, you have to be a storyteller. And that's inborn, I think. And a lot of people have this kind of talent. Not everybody chooses to torture themselves by becoming writers, but the ability is there. And it just sort of sticks in my mind. It's like a crock pot. And sometimes some stories can come together really quickly. Once I had my editor call and say, we're starting a new romance imprint and we want your book to be the lead and it's going to have to be done in 5 months. So give me an idea.
Wow.
And that book became the first of what's probably most famous series, Thunder and Roses, my Fallen Angel series. And I think I didn't call her back till the next day, but basically I said, uptight Methodist minister's daughter, Gypsy Earl. She tries to bully him into helping her village. He tries to drive her off by threatening to ruin her reputation. She's nowhere near as well behaved as she looks, and she calls him on it, and that's the beginning of the book.
That's terrific. So when you start a book, you know the beginning. Do you always know the beginning? Or sometimes do you know something else?
Often, like I said, I chew on it for a while, and I almost always have come up with a beginning, and then there's a lot I don't know. I'm not one of those writers who goes through and does page by page, chapter by chapter synopses. But I can do a synopsis, and once I can do a synopsis, which is the skeleton of the book, who the characters are, what their backgrounds are, what the conflict and historical setting is, then I can write the book. That's usually 6 to 8 pages.
When I had to write synopses for traditional publishers, I would write most of the book first because I didn't know until I got in there.
Yeah, that's not unique. There's a lot of people who are like that. They wait till the book is finished and then they write. It's just the way different people's brains work.
Yep.
Once I have the synopsis, I have the skeleton. There's a huge amount of things I don't know,
yeah.
and I invent as I go along. And if I have a deadline, eventually it gets all done.
So what
And I always have a deadline.
Yeah, deadlines, they make you let it go. That's one of the good things from my standpoint.
No, they make me generate pages. The muse doesn't show up for work until panic sets in. It's very annoying.
Now, as you've written books and you've learned that this is your process, what how is your attitude toward that panic and toward your muse? How has that changed?
I recognize it.
Yeah.
I knew that I've done through this before. I basically know that I can finish the book. And I know that if I send it in with a very weak ending, which is pretty much standard for me, I will have a chance to rewrite it after the editor's gone over it and get it so it works right. But I've never been in the middle of a book and thought, this is it, my career is over. I've always known if you just keep showing up, keep plodding along, eventually it'll be done. It'll probably be okay.
Yeah, you're more of an optimist than I am because I have had that.
You're an editor. Editors aren't optimists. They always look for what's wrong.
Well, that's a good point. Do you think that period when you've sent the book off and you think the ending is weak, but the editor's going to look at it, do you find that you're still churning the book in your head and that you're percolating back there so that when it comes back, you know what it needs?
I'm thinking about it, but I'm no longer panicked. There's sort of a Zen-like state. It's out there. I can breathe deeply for a few days, and it probably won't come back to me for at least another week or two.
Okay.
And then I'm ready to finish it.
Now, in this process, what's your favorite part? And what's your least favorite part?
When the book has been accepted and they're sending me the money. There's a Dorothy Parker saying, I like having written.
Yes.
And I think that's true of a lot of writers. The writing process is not comfortable. It is not fun. It is not joyful, but it's deeply satisfying. And when I've just done a book and I think, yeah, that's actually pretty good, then I'm happy. And I don't have to worry about it again for another few months.
You remember the movie Romancing the Stone, where it starts off and she can't find anything to blow her nose with because she's run out of things and she's all messy and everything.
Weary. Yeah.
My niece, who is not very old, saw the movie and said, "Look, it's Aunt Pat." And she hadn't even seen me in the worst throes of deadline. But yes.
One of the silliest things about that movie is at the end, the editor is reading the book with the author in the office.
I know. I know.
That's just plain silly. And the author's looking all well-groomed, which is really silly.
Well, and that's the other thing that movies do wrong all the time, like the TV show Castle, where
Oh, I love that show.
I love the show too. It's funny, but he would write a book and 2 weeks later it would be on the bestseller list. And I'm like, what? No.
The time frame is a little fuzzy.
Well,
he was probably always delivering late and they were ready to throw it into crash production.
The other thing they did is they had him in an office where he's sitting at his desk and he's looking out through a glass wall into the rest of the apartment. And I'm thinking, no, because you don't want to be distracted. And he's supposedly writing away happily and his daughter comes in and says, "Oh, can I ask you a question?" And he jumps up merrily and says, "Yes, of course." And
you haven't noticed that Rick Castle is infinitely distractible. Remember the summer when his ex-wife, who was his editor, dragged him off to Long Island to sit him down and make him finish a book? That part I believe.
Yeah, that part might have rung true, but I don't know about that, being happily interrupted. I hate interruptions.
Depends. I frequently welcome them. Here I am talking to you and I should be writing.
But this is exploring your writing, so it's really work.
I don't need to. I know my writing. I know my failings.
Do you celebrate different parts of the book, ending it, starting it, having it published? Do you have any?
Ending it is usually a very good time. When it comes out, I'm usually pleased. I get, particularly get that first copy and you look at it and you say, "This looks pretty good. I hope somebody likes it." Apart from that, I might use it as an excuse to buy a piece of jewelry from the Metropolitan Art Museum catalog.
Do you have any ideas that just, at least to this point, have not gelled? You had this idea, you think it's really good, you like it, but you haven't been able to bring it to fruition? Or do you have any that you absolutely gave up on?
Not really.
Okay.
I've been lucky. I've been able to convince editors to let me write pretty much what I wanted to. The one time is when I left Ballantyne and I'd been writing historicals with magical elements. I really like the magical fantasy stuff. And when I went to look for a new publisher, they all said either do dark fantasy, which I wouldn't do, or historical. So I had to go back to straight historical. But then I went and I wrote some more fantasy stories and published them. So I can't say I felt too deprived.
Do you think your forays into contemporary and fantasy have reflected at all in your historical romances?
Not really. They're all
Mhm.
stories, and they were just things I felt like writing then.
Did that make your muse happier? Did it have
Yeah, the
any
muse
impact
gets
at
a
all?
little impatient and starts banging on the bars if she gets bored. So she needed those books. What I did find, though, in the process was that my primary audience is historical romance, and that while there are people who love historicals, they won't necessarily follow you to contemporary. Some will and will love them. Same thing when I was writing the fantasy novels. I got a lot of emails along the more in sorrow than in anger saying they hoped I'd go back to straight historicals.
Uh,
And I do pay attention to my readers. The fact is, there's usually a lot of choices out there. I don't have a lot of trouble picking one that's going to satisfy myself as well as my readers.
mm,
At least that's the theory.
yeah.
And romance people are really nice. They almost never write you nasty emails. There's only been a handful in my career that I've gotten that were really super critical or angry.
How about wonderful letters from readers or
Oh, those I love.
interactions with
Yes,
them? But have you
I'm
had?
always happy when somebody likes one. Yes.
Do you have any stories about encountering readers that particular different or interesting?
Well, when I wrote my alcoholic hero book, The Rake and the Reformer, which is now available in a slightly modified version called The Rake, it was a very accurate depiction of somebody who was an alcoholic and didn't think he had a problem, and then thought he had a problem, but he could fix it, and then he realized he had a problem and he couldn't fix it, and eventually got sober. Very realistic. And
Mm.
once I was at a Romantic Times conference, a woman walked up to me and said, The Rake and the Reformer, and then she burst into my tears. I took
Oh,
her hand and sat down, and we talked, and I patted her hand. It really spoke to something in her.
oh,
And
that's wonderful.
my other really good story is my first contemporary, The Burning Point, aroused some ire on the internet because it's about a couple that got divorced because of violence and, being forced back together and having to work through the past, where interestingly, the guy is the one who'd worked on himself more than the woman. But it was pretty accurate about abuse and how it can grow and how the signs aren't always obvious at the beginning. And how do you work through that?
Mm.
And I was on a radio chat show on it was WAMU in Washington, an NPR station, and it was a call-in. Darius McGinty, if you remember, he was a really good
Mhm.
host, and
Mhm.
he would often have science fiction authors. And then one of the WRW members called him in and said, "You got to get some romance writers." So I ended up talking, and a woman called in and said she read the book, she realized it wasn't her fault, and she left him.
Wow. Wow. Talk about changing a life. That's amazing.
Well, there was
Um,
a lot of stuff in that book. It's not for everybody, but I'm proud of what I did.
Good for you. That's terrific. Do you have any a special approach or words of wisdom or thoughts about writing characters who are in the opposite gender?
Well, observation of the day-to-day world is pretty useful. People are different, and the people are different, and they're also the same. My characters have in common that they're all pretty basically decent, honorable people, male or female. The women are not usually 18-year-old fluffheads. In fact, I've never written one that was that young and that dumb because innocence isn't inherently interesting. It's failure that makes us interesting. So my
Hmm.
characters have always got some mileage on them, and they've learned by it, and they've become better people through it. And this goes back to what I said earlier about my themes: stronger in the mended places.
Absolutely. Do you ever get a blowback from readers, though, that they don't want to read such flawed characters? Because I think there's the perception, especially, that romance is about perfect people.
They don't read my books; they read other people's books. I mean, there are certain individual books where some people might have a problem with it for one reason or another, and they're certainly entitled to their opinion. But as Kristen Hanna once told me back when we were both chicks, you have to train your readers what to expect from you. A job she has done superbly well.
Yeah, and then you have to continue to deliver superbly well. Yeah.
Well, you do your best, and there's certain kinds of characters and certain kinds of stories that interest me, and I keep writing them. And there are a certain number of people out there who want to keep reading them.
So this is a change a little bit, but what's something you are really good at that few people know about?
Cat whispering.
And how many cats do you have?
4, all rescues, all with a deep sense of entitlement. Cats don't show gratitude. It keeps you humble. As I look over here, I see Smokey McGregor behind me, and Panda Max is in the chair.
Yeah. And you rescue them as, kittens or older
Older.
cats or
Kittens are so adorable, they can usually find a home, but I figured it's the adult cats that need homes.
I'm on my 3rd rescue collie, and I think the youngest one was 4 months, but, there is something they are s the back of kittens and collies' heads are just so amazingly cute. I don't know how anybody could not just scoop them up and love them, but, yeah, I like the older dogs
Well,
too,
kittens don't
so
stay kittens very long. I adore Laura Resnick's Facebook posts on her kitten fostering and so forth. All her, I don't know, 70 kittens or so. They're all totally adorable, but they're adoptable. These guys, 3
Mhm.
of them came from Cat Rescue of Maryland, and they lived in an adoption cage at the cat hospital. One of them had a terrible name that meant he would never be adopted. Another one had a tendency to hide in the supply room behind the food bags, and the other one was just a little kind of shy. He'd been living wild. But they all looked like they needed homes. I said, well, how about if I take him home and see if he fits in here? And they all have.
What was a terrible name?
Toonces. I looked it
How do you
up.
spell that?
Toonces. Apparently, it was back in the 1970s or something like that. Saturday Night Live. There was a car driving cat who always crashed the car. It was the stupidest thing. I looked it up on YouTube. And here was this little innocent, sad-looking gray tabby who would just sit there in the cage. And there was a little thing there about how he had a heart problem and he was going to have cardiograms. He'd have to give him a pill every day. And he was named Toonses. He was there for quite a while. He didn't
Oh,
seem
and
to.
how long have you had him?
Oh, I don't know, 3, 4 years. A couple of times I actually took him into one of the rooms to get better acquainted with him. He didn't seem to have much personality. But I brought him home, and once he came out from the cat safe room, he started developing a lot of personality, and he's now known as Smokey the Destroyer.
That might not be the kind of personality you would have wanted him to show.
Well, he's very
I mean,
charming about it. He's not malicious.
okay, I think even a non-malicious destruction after a while would wear on me, but
He likes jumping on things and knocking stuff off shelves. What can I say?
you are definitely more patient than I am. Uh, have you had any of your stories that surprised you? That because a lot of writers kind of know what their story's going to be when they start it and they work it all out and then they go into it. But it sounds to me like you've got room for surprise.
I'm never really surprised because the things that happen, even though I don't all know them all in advance, are all part of the landscape of my mind. So if something comes up that I haven't thought of before, I'll be, yeah, that works. That works.
But so you don't really think a story is it's gonna be this kind of story, and then it turns out to be a different kind of story. Is that because you don't go into it with expectations, or because because the stories tend to follow your expectations?
I'd say the latter is more accurate, tend to follow my expectations. Although the second Regency I ever wrote, I wrote a rather funny synopsis for my editor for it. And then the book ended up being much more emotional, which is about the time I figured out that emotional is what I did.
Ah, okay.
I mean, the book wasn't working until I gave the heroine a loss of mother complex, and then it fell into place.
While you're punishing these poor characters and making them go through all these horrible things, does that ever echo back into your mood? Does it, do you feel bad because you're making them suffer so much?
I know that they will thank me at the end.
Oh boy, you're a tough one. I don't know.
What can I say?
Uh,
This is why I looked at those questions you wrote and thought a lot of these are not going to fit.
so for readers who have never tried your books, let's give them a good place to start. What would be a good entry point to know whether you and they are good reader author match?
Well, one of my books that has been very, very popular over the years is one of my early Regencies, and I rewrote it into more of a historical. It's called The Bargain. And the heroine will not receive a very substantial legacy from her father unless she marries by age 25. He wanted to force her into marriage. He thought she might be too picky. So she ends up going to the military hospital and marrying a dying man so she could be married. And he doesn't have the grace to die for her.
Oh, okay. And that's called The
Yeah, and
Bargain.
it's just a real evergreen. People like it. It's one of the ones that I sold the rights to. It was originally called The Would-Be Widow. I sold the rights to the bargain version, the historical version, to Kensington, and it just stays in print. People keep liking it. And it's not really part of a series, so you can just read it and see if it works for you.
And how about a book that you think that even your really devoted readers might have overlooked more than your other books? Do you have one like
Oh,
that?
I can't really tell. I think just about every one of my books has somebody who thinks it's their favorite.
Well, that's
I'd be
wonderful.
very sad if
That's
they all thought the
wonderful.
same book was the best. The two that get mentioned a lot are my alcoholic book, The Rake, my alcoholic hero, and One Perfect Rose, which is my death and dying book, but it does have a happy ending. Trust me on this.
I have that one. I have that in the
Yeah,
small
it's cute.
hardback. Okay, is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't that you would like to answer?
My mind doesn't work that way. You're the journalist. Uh, I don't think in terms of what is my favorite or if I wanted to have dinner with three people. Oh, one of the questions was, what person, living or dead, would you like to write a book with?
Oh,
To which my
yes.
answer was, there will be blood on the floor before that happens.
So they have to work with you. You aren't going to work with them, huh?
I think it's a non-starter.
Well, I think it's an interesting question, though. It came from a reader, and I think it's really stirred some interesting comments, including yours. And I can understand that. Okay, and tell readers where they can find out more about you and your books.
Well, I have a website, maryjoputney.com. It lists all of the books, and there's always samples you can read and see if it suits you. I am on Facebook as Mary Jo Putney, and I go to conferences now and then. But mostly I'm a basic introvert. I stay inside, I write my books, I travel, and I pet my cats. Sometimes I look at the landscape, sometimes I look at the cat. Smokey's now on my desk with his head about to come to rest on the microphone that didn't work. Whoops, here comes Panda.
Don't destroy us yet,
Okay, Panda's going to move in front of the monitor, and he's huge. That's why he's Panda Max.
Oh.
He's 20 pounds.
Wow.
He's a lot of cat.
Okay.
He's a total sweetheart.
We're going to wrap up with some either or questions, and I know you're going to be trouble. I just know you are.
Thank you.
Okay. Day or night?
Nocturnal.
Opera or show tunes?
Neither.
Paper plates or best china?
Depends on the circumstances.
Mary Jo, which do you like better?
If I'm at a picnic, I want paper plates. If I'm at home and I have company, it's definitely the best china. If it's just me and the mayhem consultant, it's the non-breakable, dense plastic plates. But they look nice.
House decorating or gardening?
I kind of like both, but I have more time for the house. But I do have a deck on the side that I put lots of flowers in the summer.
Paint or wallpaper?
Paint.
Thank you. Pickup or sports car?
I don't have either.
But which would you rather be in? Pickup or sports car?
Both of them have a certain discomfort level.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
Hiking boots or cowboy boots?
Probably the hiking boots. I have a nice pair of sort of hiking shoes that I wore in Botswana that worked out very well, although not exactly boots.
Okay, that's fair. Spring or fall?
I love them both. Spring is more optimistic. Fall is more poignant.
Ice cream or cake?
Can I have them together?
No. One.
This is Fantasyland. I get to have both.
One. You're not going to pick one?
Depends on the cake. If it's a really fabulous cake, probably the cake. But if it's just a boring old average cake, ice cream, preferably peanut butter ripple.
Okay. White chocolate or dark chocolate?
Dark. Darker the better.
Cruise or trekking vacation?
More likely. I've done a lot of cruises, a lot more than I've done trekking.
Okay.
Because you pack up once, you unpack once, and you sail in your hotel.
Yeah. Hot air balloon or train trip?
I've never been in a hot air balloon. That could be kind of fun, but they don't travel very far. The train's better for distance.
True. Okay. I'm gonna ask this one just for the record. Cat or dog?
Silly question. Panda, what should I tell her? Smokey, what should I tell her? Okay, where's the spook? And where's Reggie the Rotten? They all have
you have to say it out loud so my dog can hear you.
Dog, you're lucky that Pat adopted you.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Last one. Go for the best first or save the best for last?
Usually save the best for last. As a kid, I always saved the icing on the cupcakes for last.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Mary Jo. I really appreciate you. We went through many tech travails, and what do you, a consultant for Mayhem?
Oh, John is
The
great.
Mayhem.
He gives me things about how to explode things, how to do a 1815 version of a delayed fuse. He came up with a pipe bomb for Susan King, who writes Scottish historicals, a working
That's
pipe bomb to blow up
wonderful.
the keystone of a stone bridge in the Highlands. He
That's
knew
terrific.
what gun James Bond used. Everyone should have a mayhem consultant. Every writer,
Well,
anyhow.
and this time he was a non-Mayhem consultant in helping us get set up technologically, and we really
He's a tech
appreciate that.
guy.
He is a
Have you
great
ever
guy.
noticed the time on Ninx when we were talking about this sort of thing, and most of the romance writers had techie significant others and husbands?
No, I don't think I did. I have some family consultants, but I tell you, my family doesn't have as many useful skills as I need. I know some of the writers who have their husbands or spouses becoming assistants or doing marketing and stuff, and I'm thinking, great, I have one who has a PhD in physical chemistry. What good is that to me, huh? None.
You'd be
So
surprised.
well, I want to say again, thank you to you and to John, and hope that all the listeners will come back next week to hear another author and find out what their stories are behind the stories. And in the meantime, have a great week of reading.
Thank you, Pat. I'm an author and I do love readers.
That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye. If you like this podcast, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter through our Patreon page. With a small monthly donation as little as $1 a month, you can help with the hosting and editing costs that make the show possible. To thank our Patreon supporters, we offer them special bonuses. Find out more at authorslovereaders.com or at patreon.com/authorslovereaders. That's PATREON. We also hope you'll subscribe to this podcast and leave us a review wherever you listen to us. Both of those help more folks find the podcast. Of course, the very best way for other folks to find the podcast is for you to tell them about it. So we sure hope you will.